President of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association, and humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. And if you are not currently a member, and those words resonate in your heart, I hope you will join us and become one of our members. Are there any persons here for the first time who would, who are willing to introduce themselves and tell us why they came? This is a possibility, not a requirement. So many people have realized that we'd rather not do that. And certainly, we don't want you to do something you don't want to do. Okay. One thing, the Humanist Deep Thought Group discussed the book Snow by Orhan Pamuk. And it just happens that Orhan is going to be on the Stanford campus on Monday at 6 to 8 p.m. in Memorial Auditorium, which is 55-1 Sierra Mall. He is the Nobel Prize, he had the Nobel Prize in Literature, and it is the book was on Turkey, which he is from Turkey. He is in Turkey. He is a citizen of Turkey. Though he has gotten in trouble because he tends to think of things like genocide. Okay, moving on, okay. Yes, we're to announcements. So let us begin with our treasurer's report, who will give us a brief financial report of how we're doing and encourage us to do even better, no matter how good we're doing.
Okay. Our goal for the year is $70,500. We have collected $57,750 to date, which means that we are just barely ahead of the goal-to-date numbers. We're $1,157 above where we need to be to make our target. This was not a good week that we're ending up with, folks. We need about $1,350 per week to make it to the end of the year. This last week, we only took in $700. So now is again the time to let the malls out of your wallets and put money into this when it goes by.
And follow up on that, I will say we do pass the collection plate, which is what Hilton was referring to, and if you have a line for it, put something in, and as we say, no amount is too large to be accepted. Okay, other announcements, Mr. Gary?
This Thursday there's an event called Our Constitution, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. What to do when your government isn't listening. That's Thursday in Mountain View. If they've got questions, I got flyers here.
Okay, any other announcements before we move on? I would remind you that there is a children's program that meets at the same time we do. We have the older children and the younger children. And if you have children, grandparents, neighbors, whatever, we have room for one more.
There's a social action committee meeting this afternoon at 1:45 at Pete's Coffee around the corner. And the South Bay Video Group is meeting on Thursday. It's all in the calendar.
Okay, now a word about how we get our lunches each Sunday. As you probably know, we ask various of our members to provide things, and here's the rule. If you can bring an entree to Sunday lunch, please sign the entree sign-up sheet on the coffee table in the back, which is back over there by the coffee pot. The November sign-up sheet is there too, and the forum speakers are listed on the sheet behind it. If you will be reimbursed, if you wish to be reimbursed, you can take your receipt to the treasurer. That was a handsome young man who stood up and told us about money. Or take it off your income tax, or get a free meal. So, with that, I think I'm ready to turn the meeting over to our member, Armina Noranian, who will introduce our speaker.
In August of this year, the Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen, made a decision which changed the number of touchscreen voting machines that you see at the polling places. Our guest today will be talking about what led to Bowen's decision, the impact that this will have, and what's next. Our guest is Sherry Healy. She's a co-founder of the California Election Protection Network and is a coordinator for the Election Defense Alliance. She's chair of the Marine Democracy for America's Election Reform Committee, as well as a delegate for California's 6th Assembly District. She has authored numerous articles on this subject. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Healy.
Thank you, Humanist, for inviting me here today. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to tell my perception on what's going on today. Starting with Bowen, I want to commend her in what she has done. For my glasses. I just read what Andrew Gumbel said, and I love the way he put it, so I'm going to use his words in the beginning here because I think he says it so succinctly. He said, "Everyone who cares about American democracy should raise a toast, or a hat, or a loud cheer to California Secretary of State Deborah Bowen, a politician who has somehow resisted the pressure of special interest lobbyists, campaign fundraisers, and the rest of a whole dubious cabal surrounding modern politics, and actually has done the job of representing the people who elected her to office." Many, in the newspaper, many of the articles seem to paint Deborah Bowen as a heretic who's come out of nowhere, who's taken this very audacious position of decertifying our election equipment. But I don't know, how many of you know that there were 2 House Judiciary Committee meetings on the 2004 election under Conyers? How many people are aware of that? How many people know the Government Accountability Office has written 2 scathing indictments on election equipment in the United States? Who knows that the NYU's Brennan Center for Justice has an amazing report on all the vulnerabilities to our election systems? And how many people have seen what we are calling now the Princeton hack? It's based on a half-inch thick document on all the vulnerabilities to our voting systems. Okay. California election advocates such as myself have been following these issues and are horrified that they're not being reported in the newspaper. I met with the San Francisco Chronicle editorial panel and asked them, why do you not cover these issues? And they said to me, Sherry, do you really think people are interested in this? Well, I think we ought to be interested in this. And that is why I have taken my free time for the last 4 years full-time to work on this issue, because I really think that people need to know what I know. And that's why we work to get Bowen in office, and why she is doing, we cultivated her and championed her and she's carried out the grassroots cause. She's truly, genuinely a grassroots candidate who is listening to us. She's had an open door policy, so we are delighted that she's put in these commendable, well, first of all, she put together a UC, primarily UC Berkeley, what we're calling a red team hack team, based on all these reports, and did an independent study. And how many people know that her predecessor, Bruce McPherson, did the same thing? Okay. This is a good audience to be talking to. Well, Bruce McPherson was forced into also having an independent study. He has studied, it's called the VSTAAB group, and they're out of Berkeley, and computer experts out of the Northern Bay Area, independent. And they too found that the election equipment that we're using is not up to par. And based on that, McPherson put together his mitigations, his fixes to make the system okay to use. One of which was to allow voters the opportunity to ask for a paper ballot upon request. And the problem with that was most people didn't know it, that they were supposed to ask for paper. So that didn't do us a whole lot of good. So there was a huge outcry that that wasn't sufficient. And so when Bowen came on to her shift, and having got elected on this mandate to clean up the system, she finally put together her team, and her team, what they came up with was just, again, the same stuff, but it's shocking. We keep hearing it. One person, one of the computer experts, I forget which one, said they were looking for what they call backdoors, all the secret stuff in the back. Oh, I see. And in point of fact, what they found was that was, quote unquote, superfluous, because there was no security on the front door. I looked for things in the back door. There was actually no security. And let me see if I can find some of the things. The conclusion of this red team hack, there's just too much to go into it. It's too technical, but I'll just tell you kind of an overview here. They say the most damaging type of attack is that of an insider on central tabulator databases. This is relatively simple to do. It can take less than 90 seconds, and traces of the attack can be erased. Sequoia and Diebold used Microsoft databases running on MS Windows. The red teams had no access to Microsoft's source code, yet were able to change these critical databases anyway. In other words, look, anyway, and here's another example without boring you. Screwdrivers and mini bar keys. Do you know what mini bar keys are? When you go to a hotel, there's a little mini bar keys that are ubiquitous. They have no source code, yet the red team was able to work their way around security tapes and locks and break into the machines using screwdrivers and mini bar keys. It would take at most a few minutes to plant a virus or Trojan horse that could be carried back to the central tabulator. Since thousands of machine, quote-unquote, sleepovers, you know what that means, right? Sleepovers, that's where, you bring your equipment home. Sleepovers at the polling stations at least one night before an election. That gives people with access to the garage or union hall where they are stored unfettered access to do real damage to democracy. You need not have a PhD in computer science to slip a card into a slot, only access to one single machine. So anyway, that's unacceptable, because if we're talking about our elections, we're talking about transfer of power and the disposition of billions of dollars in, in contracts. So we're talking about high stakes. If we look at Las Vegas and how much money is on a table, the amazing amount of people will do to cheat systems, we can't make it that easy. It's just not very smart. So anyway, Bowen finally, so bottom line, Bowen is not a heretic. She is doing something that's extremely reasonable. And what she's done is she's put together her mitigations to make things as right as it can possibly be given the equipment and circumstances we have. And let me see, let's just go over those real quick. I won't go into all of them because there's quite a few, but as Armina said, jurisdictions now will not, for instance, in Santa Clara County, as you know, you are the touchscreen county and you have the Sequoia Edge equipment. Those are what we call DREs. Do you know what DREs are? Oh, okay. Well, sorry to use jargon, but that means DRE is direct recording equipment, and it is the touchscreen equipment that we're familiar with. And it's all been retrofitted now, thanks to Kevin Shelley. It now has the paper trail. But unfortunately, it was a very cynical response to paper trail because, we want physical evidence of our equipment. And what they have done is, instead of making it, we thought we were going to get like a little piece of paper. Instead, it's this little roll, and it's usually on fax paper that once it's exposed to light, disappears. And at one point, they were going to hold it for us and read it to us. We're going to pay. The vendors wanted us to give them an archive fee, and they were going to store it for us, which kind of gets around the whole idea of, we wanting our paper evidence to affirm accuracy. So anyway, those are DREs. It's kind of synonymous with touchscreens. Now, because of these new revelations by Bone's latest report, we're going to only have one, because we've determined they're not safe. So we're going to have one because we need them for the disability access. And because there's so few people that actually use these within the disabled community, they're going to have 5 people voluntarily cast their ballots to protect voter privacy, because you want to make sure that the one person we know who happens to be disabled isn't, the only vote there on a DRE. And those are going to be now hand counted at the central site. And
You said there's only one. You said there's only
one per, I was just going to clarify, one per polling place, not per precinct.
One printer?
One DRE, one touchscreen. The rest are going to be, you're going to have probably office scan ballots, like many other counties. I'm in Marin County. We're familiar with the office scan. They're like, you fill in the bubble, and they're a big piece of paper. And they're going to be taken to the central site, and they're going to be scanned there. In Marin County, that's our main equipment, so we just scan them at the precinct. Because you don't want to spend the $2,000 per machine, this late hour. You're going to just, I believe what you're going to do is just send them all to the central site and have them tabulated there. So anyway, that's going to take care of that. And then there's going to be probably a beefed up audit. Our current audit is not adequate. We have a 1% manual random audit, and it's been subverted in many ways. It's been improved. It used to not include absentee ballots and a lot of things that it used to be random. They're fixing some of those problems. That's not been announced yet, but that's coming, so that's good. Before the presidential primary, all software firmware must be reinstalled. And I can tell that this is a technical group, so I'm not going to go into all the boring details, but essentially some of the things that were determined were the spread of viruses, and when you have to reinstall things, instead of just having one computer at the other end, they're going to kind of break the chain and have some kind of gap between these systems to prevent the contamination of viruses. And public will be allowed to look at, but not touch, all externally visible security seals. So the equipment is going to have more security seals. And let's see, no one's allowed to record the order or time of voters voting. That was another revelation, that it was pretty easy to circumvent the privacy of the ballot by a number of methods, and so they're trying to fix that. So all these things are magnificent. They're really important, and they're going to close a lot of the security holes for what we call outsider tampering. That's you and I going to the polls and trying to cheat and have our candidate win. This schedule, this coming election, yes. It'll be the next election in November.
Did you say that Rogers is voting on the people in Washington?
Yes, in Santa Clara, except for the disabled, you're going to be able to use the machines, but all of those votes cast on the DREs, even though they're going to be on the little paper trail, are going to be hand counted at the central site. Okay, but what's wrong with this is that she is fixing a lot. She's doing a commendable job. She's our hero. I am just so thrilled that she is taking the courageous stance to do what needs to be done, and it's a long time coming. She's going to fix outsider tampering. But what is left, and this is really great for humanists who are very keyed into the idea of personal responsibility, there's nothing really done about insider tampering. I'm sorry, dyslexic. Insider tampering. That means the election officials. And again, if we're talking about the motive to steal elections, the disposition of billions of dollars, transfer of power, we need a structure for democracy that will sustain us for our worst days, not our best. If this is a 230-year plus experiment here, we want it to last. So structurally, we've got to be smart. Thomas Jefferson said the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We have not been paying attention. We've grown complacent because it's been working pretty well, but that's not paying attention until now. Now people sense things are not right, and having been looking behind the curtain here, I can tell you no one is adequately minding the store. But the shenanigans that are going on cannot exist in daylight. Once you're onto this, they cannot exist. We're supposed to be a democracy. We can't be a democracy if we get our principles right. So, here's my message. And this is a really, really hard one for people to hear. You're not going to like it because it goes counter to everything you've been told recently. And that is that if we want to keep our democracy, we better think about precinct voting, because precinct voting is the hardest to subvert. You have the chain of custody, all the meaningful parts, firsthand, no layers of interception, right there where we can see things from beginning to end. And let's see. I want to say this right because it's so unpopular, so I'm going to read from here. Democracy cannot survive without precinct voting. Precinct voting, yes, it's hard to believe that ragtag of grammar schools, garages, and libraries that blanket our nation and that is held together by our dedicated and generous, can't even talk, elderly can be so important, but it is. Because when all genuine democracies are reduced down to their essence, just two principles remain. The absolute privacy of ballots to protect voters from persecution, and two, a bottoms-up, citizen-controlled structure of governance for counting those ballots. Precinct voting cannot only uphold these two principles, but it's unique in its ability to verifiably guarantee that these principles are met. How can precinct voting guarantee it? By assuring that its operations are transparent to the largest possible number of eyewitnesses without reliance on interpretation by government or machines. Notably, the opposite is true with any inverse election structures that are ultimately top-down and centralized. For example, both vote by mail and vote by internet methods are top-down and centralized. Surprisingly, despite their inherently undemocratic structure, top-down and centralized, we call those TDACs now, more jargon, methods of holding elections are increasing in popularity at a perilous rate. Right now, California is 40% vote by mail, and yet it's the least secure. It's important for our citizenry to realize that precinct voting sets the standard that any other voting method must meet, if not exceed. In the meantime, all voting methods that cannot attain this minimum standard must be rejected for as long as it's possible to still do so. About voluntarily locking ourselves out of our democratic process. Once gone, precincts are extinct, and we're not getting them back. Here's a pivotal question. Have the increasing number of citizens who who are voluntarily opting to forfeit their precinct rights in exchange for the convenience and efficiency of TDAC methods consider the finality of their decision? Again, Thomas Jefferson gave us a good warning about the cost of losing sight of our electoral process when he said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." Heeding this warning, an examination of unintended consequences reveals this. Once we close the doors to precinct voting, we are not only locked out of the most meaningful portions of our democratic process, but we also lose the means to regain access. How precinct voting sets the standard. So specifically, how does precinct voting verifiably guarantee that it upholds ballot secrecy and decentralizes citizen-controlled counting, the two essential principles for a genuine democracy? Precincts are citizen-controlled territories in the public domain, expressly set up for the convenient neighborhood voting and tabulation. They provide the only voting structure that empowers citizens to observe the accuracy of the election process firsthand without reliance on trust. Thereby, precinct voting surpasses all other election structures by sustaining a genuine democracy in the 5 interdependent ways. Optimal citizen control. 2, absolute voter protection. You don't have to rely on encryption software telling you that it's installed properly. You know because you've observed the whole process from beginning to end. You do not have to have someone elite at the top telling us that they've properly installed software and are not in any way tampering with it. We don't want a trust-based system. And also it has maximum transparency, has the best verifiable security, and it allows us the most fundamental of rights, the rights for citizens to double-check the accuracy of their data. It's our data. If we check it at the precinct level, it's very decentralized, it's hard to subvert with that many eyewitnesses. Before it goes on its anonymous journey to a central site where there's so many vectors for interception, we have a very good system. And it's a system we used to use for years and years and has always been the standard. Okay, so this is my conclusion. Each generation has its guardians of democracy, and each generation has its unique challenges to uphold the integrity of our democracy. In an age of efficiency and convenience at all costs, it's particularly hard to send a message to our fellow citizens to get up and exercise their rights by walking over to their precincts, by physically participating in our democracy to protect our body politic. But if we as Americans still can appreciate the immeasurable value of the democracy we've been entrusted, for which so many have waited hours, for which so many have crossed oceans, for which so many have sacrificed their lives, then we have no choice but to reject all substandard democracy substitutes, no matter how tempting. Precinct voting is the only voting method currently available that satisfies, and I won't list all that criteria again. Therefore, it is a voting method that is verifiably derived from people to give our government the legitimacy and moral right to use its power. Precinct voting is the only method that genuinely provides consent of the governed. And I'm glad Steve Chessett's here because if we're going to use, I'm not a hand count paper ballot person, so that's what I'm sure people are thinking, oh my goodness, she's a hand count paper ballot fanatic. I think that hand count versus machine is completely the wrong frame. I'm not against machines. I love machines. What I don't like is putting verifiability in someone else's hands that I can't affirm. I would like to use those machines. If we're going to have the machines, Steve Chesson, has rank choice and instant run up. If we could do that magnificently, we could use the machines what they're good for. Let's use them for something that we want, like maybe if we want instant runoff voting. I'm not sure, but it sounds like it's a really good proposal. I'd like to look more into it. If we could affirm that and double check it at the precinct, now that's smart. It's using election integrity and it's adding something. But the things that are taking power away from ourselves and locking ourselves out. And Washington State, I have a very interesting videotape if anyone wants it. The Secretary of State of Washington, Mr. Davis, is just delighted that people love the convenience of vote by mail. He's thrilled. And he said now that 90% of Washingtonians are voting that way, there's no need for precincts. And guess what's even better? They're going to clean up that by going to internet voting, which people really love because that is so very convenient. And that is ultimately an elite system where we are locked out to the important components. You know, in principle, yes, it can be made right, but we will never firsthand know for ourselves. And when you're talking about compromising things, you do not want to compromise on issues of how we affirm our democracy, because that is the method by which all our other rights are conferred. We can't compromise on that one thing. We've got to get that right. So, reality check. Yes, people for years used absentee voting because they physically could not get to the precinct. It was under 5%. It was not an issue when it was 5% of the people. We did not have no excuse to vote by mail. Now, 40% of the United States still is excuse vote by mail. With this trend, without the unintended consequences, people not understanding what's at stake, and the fact that election integrity advocates had up until last year, had been pushing for it because we didn't used to have the paper trail. On our hierarchy of needs, when we didn't have paper, we were thinking, well, vote by mail has paper, let's recommend that. Very short-sighted solution. The truth is, we need the paper and we need, you know, so much more. So we need to close. Bowen did a great job closing California election systems from outsider tampering. But it's inappropriate to think she can do it all. I think we also have to take some responsibility to fill in the gap, to exercise our democracy, and that is to reduce the possibility of insider tampering, which is, in my opinion, a larger threat because it's so easy to do. And that would be to get smart and reaffirm our rights to affirm our data set at the precinct level. And I'm calling this our precinct voting rights, and that they're essential. And that's it.
First thing, there's 2 points. First is, everybody makes this voting thing so damn complicated. It doesn't have to be. You can solve this voting problem by just having the voting record become instant public information as soon as you pull the lever. Anybody can tabulate it, anybody can check it, you're not giving away any secret. By making the voting record public, you erase all those secrets.
It turns out I have that great idea too, but you do not want to give up, it turns out, the privacy of the ballot.
But then you're not.
Yeah. Oh, if you do it at the precinct. Yeah, that's true.
No, any way you vote, doesn't matter. Just give people a unique ID that's only that person knows. Nobody else will know.
The reason that doesn't work is with although it sounds great when you're talking about, for instance, with internet voting, it sounds so magnificent because you get a private encryption code, a number, and then you can look on your computer and you can see your computer ballot there. And we could get this whole group together. We could all look and make sure all our ballots are there, and we could all be very satisfied that we see it there. It's a digital snapshot. We have no affirmation that would ultimately get stamped.
That's what you don't get. If you make that record public, everybody can tabulate it. I can tabulate it.
Yes, that's the thing, and they tabulate it, but the thing that you cannot do is you could add a bunch of people that are unqualified. You have no affirmation to really know that, there's a lot of things that are out of our hands, and we have no way to know that that encryption software is on there properly so that it
voting
truly
in person doesn't solve that either. Currently, there's no ID in voting in person, so that doesn't solve that problem either.
No, I'm saying that you would have no way of knowing that that encryption program
There's
is
no
really
encryption
protected.
necessary, right? You just give people an ID, that person has an ID, that voting record now is public.
And how do you know that people that are not qualified are added into the mix?
You have the same problem now with
No,
voting.
you do not, because you have a finite number of people in your precinct. You cannot exceed 1,000, and people check in, and they're real people. And we are
But
able
there's
to
no
approach.
validation of that.
Yes, there is. You have to sign in.
Well, Chicago's been having that problem forever with precinct voting. You should recognize that.
What is that?
Precinct voting is a horror story.
Precinct voting is actually not perfect, but compared to every other method, it's the least difficult.
Okay,
It's the most difficult to subvert.
One final point. In California, this issue of democracy has a lot to do about redistricting problem.
Okay, that's a whole other issue. That's a whole conversation. That's a whole other meeting.
I was wondering, when you were talking about precinct voting, were you actually suggesting that the votes be counted at the precinct?
Yes.
By the
But I want to
volunteer
say,
staff and
yes, because we used to do that, and we can do it again. Our precincts are bite-sized. They cannot exceed 1,000. That's how much we can count in one night. However, if you have a ballot pool of in excess of 400,000, statistically, you could just look at 10% and get 99% accuracy. And we want at least 99% accuracy on our elections. And it is possible. And I think the hardest thing to subvert would be at the precinct level to have two different methods come to the same conclusion within a margin that would not overturn the results. And that's a machine and hand. Hand used to have 5% error rate. It's not perfect. And there's a lot of shenanigans that go on with hand count paper ballot. In the Philippines, it's hand count paper ballot. And the fix comes in when in the days after the election, with every group that checks and rechecks, it turns out the numbers change. And so it was an important thing about having things done on election night. You can have one group do the machine and one hand count, and they make sure they can't communicate. And the fact that, I'll give you a perfect example, in Los Angeles, what the difference is. We wanted to assert our right to oversee the tabulation of Los Angeles. That's 25% of California's vote. And it's our legal right to observe the tabulation. What happened is, on a whim, an unelected county official there kicked everybody out. And they called me, because I'm up in Marin County, and said, what are we going to do? She kicked us out. And there was a big group. And I said, I don't know, let's call the police. So I called the police. And the police said, well, we don't have the election code. So I faxed it to them. And then they said they were going to enforce it. And then at the last minute, the lieutenant called them off and they didn't enforce it. And I thought, oh good, we have a lawsuit. And so I spent the next month, day in and day out, calling the Attorney General, the ACLU, the Honolulu attorneys. And they said, get in line. Do you know how many laws are flouted? We can't even get people to post precinct data outside and follow the law. And my point is this. One person unelected controlling 25% of California's vote versus 5,000 precincts. There's 5,000 precincts in Los Angeles. It's very hard to subvert 5,000 precincts. It's a practical nightmare. It's not to say it can't be done. It's not to say that you have, we call this argument postal versus retail. It's a lot easier to do things on a top-down postal method than having a goon in every precinct who's going to throw that ballot box in the bay, which is something that has happened in the past. And also, there's so many, I have a long list of problems with vote by mail. It's actually the most easy to subvert because it's based on an inch of regulations that are hard to enforce, has a labyrinth of custody that's hard to control, and it's largely, if you talk to election officials, they will admit it is a trust-based system. And I like what Reagan said, trust but verify. I think it would be ridiculous for us to put our voting, something as important as voting, on a trust-based system.
would the precincts then make their count public immediately?
Absolutely, yeah.
What is the position of the Secretary of State's office on this issue of precinct versus mail voting? Because we're getting lots of solicitations in the mail.
Yeah, oh, that's right. USC DeRozzo is pushing now on the pretense that it's impossible to count things at the precinct, and it's going to be this long nightmare of the central tabulation that he wants you to vote by mail and sign up for forced vote by mail. I actually have a petition. Here's a whole blow-by-blow of all the vulnerabilities of TDAP systems, top-down systems. It's a little bit boring, but it goes through a very bulletproof matrix to show why precinct voting is a standard. And here's a thing showing a range of the documented problems with vote by mail. And internet voting is just off the map how many problems are with that. But at the back here, it has a petition that I hope you will consider signing, and it's to affirm our precinct rights to have the consent of the governed. I don't know how a government can possibly, if we got enough people signing up and saying we want to affirm our data at a precinct level because it is our democracy, how they could possibly, and the government of the people, on any pretense, tell us it's none of our business to go away. And it also has a sub-thing on there, let's not use money to promote substandard methods of voting. There are people that legitimately probably should have access to it, but I would like that number to be under 5%, where it's not threatening all of our votes. Anybody else?
There's a way of making electronic voting secure, electronic voting machines, and that's the software is generic to all elections, and access to the machine is by a lock. And the vote switch is by the same locking key or something like that.
Well, the problem is that who has the keys is always not us, and we have to believe that the elite insiders who are maintaining that key are on the up and up, and most are. You don't want to have a system that ultimately is based on that, because ultimately, in our history down the line, there's going to be someone who we don't trust who's going to have those keys, and we're going to still be locked out.
Okay, the other thing is that the software is generic, which means it works at all elections. It's capable of interpreting a paper, an equivalent electronic edition of paper ballot which you can read. And it's capable, the tabulation software will check against that ballot that's in the machine to make sure that's tabulating. We'll be able to tabulate from the right places.
I absolutely agree, because when we find shenanigans, what we've discovered is that proprietary software interests trump citizens' rights, and that is just how does proprietary interests trump democracy? We've had so many cases where the courts have ruled in favor of protecting software trade secrets, but the problem with, I don't see open source being that I'd like when we impound equipment in a litigation to be able to look in the equipment and have the right to do so, which we do not have now, usually. But to think that that's going to solve it in its own, it's a big nightmare to actually look at every single computer and make sure indeed it has the software it says it has on there. So from that angle, it's one part of the many pieces that we should get right, and that is to, I think, have, like you say, open source and non-proprietary software. It's one important essential.
Yeah, that's the idea, but software is generic to all elections, not modifiable, in Chrome, can't be erased.
Oh, well, that's impossible to prove, that's the thing. So, even with non-proprietary software, the fact that you're going to be able to prove it hasn't been in any way maliciously hacked, that opens up another can. That's why I say if we have two systems and we make them come to the same conclusion, I think that's pretty easy. And
you can't violate the Chrome.
You can't violate what?
You can't violate the Chrome. It's readable only.
I don't know. Some computer people are shaking their heads. I'm not sure. I don't know. Things are outside my.
I'm a computer person.
Okay.
That's true.
I'm Hershey Jr. I have two questions. You've mentioned absentee ballot voting several times, but what's the bottom line? What is your assessment of the reliability of absentee balloting in Santa Clara County?
I would give it an F.
What's that?
F. It comes down.
It's not accurate?
I say it's a trust-based system. I just don't think it's a good idea. But if you really can't go out and do that, it's better than not voting. I would say if you don't have any other means, go, yes, please do that. But if you really want your vote counted, please vote at the precinct.
Second question. I moved to Santa Clara County in 2002. Prior to that, I lived in San Luis Obispo County, where we had cards that you punched a hole in, and those cards are machine read. The holes cannot be changed, and there was no problem of hanging chads or anything like they had in Florida. What's wrong with these punch cards where you punch a hole in there and they're machine read?
I think we've discovered every single thing we think of has a problem, but on the hierarchy of problems, the most secure is like an OptiScan or paper ballot in the precinct. As far as the punch cards, there's actually a schedule that shows that some of those used in Florida, I think it's in Dan Rather, maybe some of you saw it, I didn't see it, but I understand that they actually use a substandard quality of paper that caused bad. You know, nothing in itself is horrible, but as long as we can I just want to double check the accuracy of my data set. If I'm sending out wedding invitations or anything of any importance, I want to double check it. I don't like things that are out of my purview, and I have to just trust that the government or their private vendors are doing things the way they tell me they're doing it. I just don't think that's a very smart position to put ourselves in. Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, I worked as a poll worker a couple of times. This was before the advent of the electronic gadgets. And I thought the system was pretty straightforward and simple, and there were, you know, we counted all the ballots, and we did that twice, and they were locked at the end, and the captain took the locked box of ballots to the central place for counting. And it really was kind of a wonderful experience to be a poll worker, and I recommend it to anyone who has the time.
You need to be the spokesperson for that, because people seem to have a collective amnesia that people will say, you mean we have to walk, go to our precinct? You know, like that's some kind of Jurassic period concept.
It was like an old movie. It was great. You know, everyone came and signed in and started talking, and so it was a very interesting experience.
Well, everything old is new again. Cod liver oil's back in fashion, and precinct voting.
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to finish by saying then the machines came in. And so I've been living here for 23 years and voting at El Carmel School most of that time, my neighborhood school. So I went up to the school, and I had been to a program at the Unitarian Church that said, you know, they're changing over these machines, but you still have the right to vote with a paper ballot, and we recommend it. I think Mr. Chesson may have been the speaker at this. And so I went to this polling place with the intention of using the paper ballot. So I got there, and as I was signing the book, I said, I don't see any paper ballots. So I saw that there were 6 machines. And I said, I would like to use a paper ballot. And I must have been the first person that asked, because they seemed kind of flustered. And so I took my ballot, and they were looking at me suspiciously, like I was some kind of deviant, you know? And so I went and used the paper ballot machine. I think it was a punch card. And came back, and then I asked the poll workers who were sitting behind the people, I said, excuse me, do these other people in line know that they have the right to ask for a paper ballot? There was some kind of like security person standing behind her, like just a man. And he said to me, come over here. So I went over, and he said, you leave right now because you are creating a disturbance in this moment. I said, all I did was ask a question. He said, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. Well, I should have, you know, faced him down and said, go ahead. But instead I went home and called the Register of Voters, and I called the newspapers, and they went out and interviewed the poll workers and so on. And so I had a very disturbing experience at my own polling place that I've been going to for over 20 years, and that's why I changed to absentee ballot, because I didn't want to be humiliated in public again.
Well, that's another scandal. That's a whole other evening. All the horror stories about just being discouraged from our right to demand a paper ballot. In fact, it goes way back to Kevin Shelley. When he just got decertified TSX, the D-Bold, he put in one of his security measures, his mitigations, was to have a big sign that said, you have a right to request a paper ballot. Then that whole debacle, I followed that whole thing, and actually that's one thing that got me involved is I actually went to his hearings and saw what happened versus what was recorded, and that story has to be told one day too. So, yes?
I worked as a precinct worker for about 20 years. I mean an election clerk for about 20 years. And it usually takes us an hour or 2 hours to make sure that the number of signatures is equal to the number of ballots. Now, you mentioned several times precinct voting, and I don't understand what you mean by that. Do you mean that the people in the precinct would actually count the votes in an election with maybe 20 or 40 issues?
Yes, but as I said, in large counties, it turns out that I think that a reasonable standard, given how close our elections are, a lot of people come up with this number, you might disagree, is a 99% accuracy. And 99% accuracy would mean that we would have to count them in the precinct. The only exception is if you have a ballot pool in excess of 400,000, you can get away with, like I can't do that in Marin County, we don't have enough ballots, but here I think you definitely, I'm not sure. But anyway, 10% would give you 99% accuracy, a random sample. And it's kind of like a glorified exit poll. I can give you the math on how that works.
I think you missed my question. My question was the practicality of it.
Yeah, I'm saying you could do 10%.
Just a minute, please. With maybe 20 or 40 issues, it would probably take, with the typical maybe 500 to 1,000 ballots, maybe 8 or 10 hours to do it. I don't think we can find people that are willing to do that. I really change the proposal. First, do you propose counting just one critical issue like the president, or do you propose having the precinct workers count all the issues on the ballot? Please explain.
I think that if we're interested in accuracy in our elections, if that is our priority, if that's going to determine how many things can be on a ballot in one night, we set up, our election code was set up for bite-sized, manageable amounts of groups of, like, it can't exceed 1,000 people. Typically, it's less than 500 people that vote. We didn't used to have these very long ballots, that's true. We might consider not having such long ballots. We might consider, I think it should be up to our county level, what do the people want? Certainly some of it should be checked, if not all. My preference would be to not have such long ballots all in one night. I think that the priority of the things we spend our money on should be getting our elections right and not compromising on that, whatever that takes. I do think it's important that it happens in one night, and that's why another option that's on the table for these larger communities is just to look at 10%, so you don't have to count them all. And I think that that's another discussion, and I don't have all the answers. All I'm saying is, if you want it, you know, to get what you pay for, I think we should be putting, this should be a priority. The #1 priority should be getting our election results to have 99% accuracy, whatever that takes, and then work back from there, and then come up with solutions. I had an idea of having high school students come in and learn about democracy by participating in it, getting the concept earlier on that, like ROTC, like so many other things we come up with to preserve democracy, that we should have them in the polls with guidance, and their grades, all these conditions. And it turns out the election code does let us have a separate crew come in just for hand counting. The law says you have to have the poll workers work like 15 8-hour shifts without changing custody. But it also allows us to have an ancillary add-on hand count team if we feel it's necessary. So on my petition that we have through the California Election Protection Network, it also says, I'd like to affirm my precinct voting rights, which includes tabulation, and I also volunteer to be a poll worker or part of a hand count team, because that is essential. We have to, if we want it, we better get up and do it.
We only have a few minutes left, so if you can keep your answers short, we can
Oh, yeah.
get more questions.
Well, it seems to me that the problem is centralized corruption versus decentralized corruption. We've always had in elections. So if you have 1,000 precincts, and some of the precincts, the Democrats are corrupt, and other precincts, the Republicans are corrupt, it tends to balance out. If you have 1,000 precincts and they're using the same corrupt machines, and one party, one small group of people can corrupt machines, then you don't get the balancing out of the areas. So I think, it seems to me that's the heart of the problem. It's not of course, ideally we want democracy and we want to participate and so on. That is not the issue here. I think we agree with that.
Yeah.
It's really a technical problem, decentralized versus.
Yeah, and so the precinct is a decentralized bottoms-up method, and it's the only one that we have right now. Yes?
Actually, I think what I've taken away from your talk is that to have every vote counted the way it should be, it takes more than just a technical solution. The system is a lot more complicated than what we see.
I was just going to say, what I've done the last few years is I signed up for a permanent absentee ballot. They send it to me, I fill it out, and then on election day, you can go into your precinct and put it in the ballot box. So that way you can take your time in voting, and it makes the voting process at the precinct go a lot faster if people just put their envelope in the voting box. You don't have to wait in line or anything.
But I'll tell you that it's not as good as voting in the precinct, because what happens is it will get scanned through something called the vote remote by people or some comparable thing, which is a signature matching technology, and it will it can be calibrated on how close of a match, and it can reject your signature. And theoretically, the county clerks will call you if it's been kicked out, but I don't think that's true. And so you stand a chance that your vote is kicked out.
You mentioned ranked choice and instant runoff, and I've also heard of Australian voting, which is supposedly better. I don't understand the reasons, but it's a big world, and I'm sure
it's mandatory. They have mandatory voting.
It's a big world, and I'm sure that in some countries they have things figured out a little bit better. So what's an example of the best system that you know of?
Our system is somewhat based on what they call the Australian ballot, which is a private ballot, and I like our old system of precinct voting. I don't see anything that's better than that. Just going back to what we used to do not that long ago was pretty darn good.
Hi, I'm Jim Stauffer. I work with Californians for Electoral Reform, and you pointed out Steve Chesson a few times. He's the president of our organization. And of all the myriad things that are going through my mind, one thing I'd like to put out is that what we really need is the various electoral reform and election reform groups to maybe talk more with each other, because we work more at the voting system level, and I can easily make the argument that even if you've got 5 nines reliability in your equipment, we still don't have a really democratic election system. And some of the things that you advocate are kind of like get in the way of what we're trying to do. And I think we all need to talk a little more and learn a little more about each other's perspective.
I have been having a discussion with Steve about that, because I think there are comparable, like for instance, instant run-up voting, I think would be done at the precinct level. That's true.
Right. Yeah. I think maybe we need to, because it's not. There's several facets to what's wrong with our system. You're working on one. We're working on another.
I think this is the most basic of the facets of it. Getting the accuracy. Accuracy has to come towards the features. Those features are extremely important too. So I mean.
But not to the extent of excluding then other election reforms is what I mean. Don't step on our toes and we won't step on yours.
Okay.
Maybe both toes
I
should
think
step on.
there's a mutual solution, I'm sure. Anything else? Thank you so much for having me.
Billy, what's the status of the lunch? Are you ready for us to spring loose, or should we kill a few more minutes?
How about 5 minutes?
5 minutes. We have 5 more minutes by the grace of the sun. So if you have no more questions, Gary?
Come back.
Encore. No, we wanted, we have a few more minutes, and we want to find out why did people tend to vote Republicans to become more conservative after we get time.
Washington State claims that the Democrats are the evil cheaters in that state. So, it's an equal opportunity crime.
I'm on this permanent absentee ballot. How can I get off of that?
I just noticed there's a proposal that if you don't vote one election, they're going to kick you off. But I think that's a good question. How do you? I think you might re-register. That's a very good question. I'm not sure.
You just contact the registrar voter's office.
You just contacted the registrar voter's office.
I'm just wondering if maybe the smaller precincts are an answer to that, and I'm kind of curious why we don't pay volunteers the way we do people who serve on the jury. I think that investment in democracy is very important.
They do get some very small stipend of, what is it, $30 or something? Oh, really? It's not that big. I want to say one thing about forced vote by mail. There's a movement toward many of the communities are moving towards votes. This is a dirty secret. They're moving to forced vote by mail. They're closing, you don't use, more and more people are not using the precincts, they're closing them, they're making central polling areas, and they're pushing hard and fast for voting vote by mail. And in San Diego County, if you know about the Blackwater issue, how many people know about Blackwater? It's been in the news every day. They want to come to the West Coast in San Diego, and in San Diego County's a tiny community called Truro. There's 460 people, and they want that issue, whether Blackwater can come there to be on the ballot. Actually, it's a recall election of their supervisors that voted for it. They want to pull them out. That's going to be a forced vote by mail issue. The problem is the number one person in charge there, Deborah Seiler, is a former Eagle Sequoia vendor, and she's responsible, I think, for buying Solano County a lot of uncertified software. I think, don't quote me on the video here, I think something like $400,000. And her number two in charge, Michael Booth, his underlings are in prison for the mishandling of the Ohio recount, and he has been charged with mishandling absentee ballots. And those two people of dubious reputation are going to be counting those votes. So absentee people who think they're doing a good job by circumventing the mail system where you wouldn't mail a gold watch, by handing it to their headquarters, it's like Stalin says, it's not how you vote, it's who counts the vote that matters most. And if you have these two people counting your votes, that is a problem. And we're pushing to have one open precinct in Truro so that we can control the essential portions of the election. And that's just a poster child for what's wrong with forced vote by mail.
My daughter lives in Newport Beach. It has to go by mail because they didn't have quite enough people to man or woman precincts. So there is with an increasing problem of staffing precincts, don't you think?
I understand that's the issue, and that's why I think if we want these rights, this is why we have to, democracy should be a verb. We need to be in there and doing it for ourselves, ours. And I hope that people will volunteer to be poll workers. I've never done it, and I will do it too. I know it's not a pleasant thing. I'd like to push for double shifts, so I think that might help us all.
Okay, I'm familiar with voting by mail type of situation, especially for stockholders, and I think if the originally might do it this way, this is a double envelope. And the envelope is on signatures and stuff is on the outside envelope.
I have that whole thing. First of
So
all,
inside envelope is
it's what we have here
plain
too. It's not enough. We have, I could go into a long explanation about that, but I think it's very important that everyone knows. I worked with the Oregon activists for 2 years to come up with an audit because their system, you always hear, Oregon loves their system. They do. They have a very trustworthy Secretary of State, Bradbury. He's not going to run again. If you had a Catherine Harris or Kenneth Blackwell at the helm, it's going to be a different situation. It is a trust-based system, and it's never been audited. So they may like it because some Ralph Nader types seem to get elected there. That's their only indication that it works, and that's what's wrong with it.
Hi, Chef. Great talk. Speaking as an individual now, not on behalf of my organization, I've always been an advocate of changing the election day to be an election weekend. That would solve a lot of the issues of getting enough polling places, getting enough precinct workers, people being able to actually vote, and eliminating presidential years, the East Coast effect. And I wanted to know, voting on Tuesday is an archaic hangover from the 18th century. Do you, either personally or as an organization, have any opinion on that?
Well, I understand it's a constitutional amendment to move it from
No,
it's not.
It's federal law.
Federal law, okay. Well, one proposal, I guess Kucinich came up, one we came up with was to move Labor Day or Memorial Day to either honor labor or honor the veterans. But I think a better idea, Kucinich says move Washington's birthday, which is kind of moved around anyway, so let's move that one. I don't know, but I agree with the national holiday.
I just wanted to express the opinion of gratitude for all of you people that are working on breaking out our voting system, because I think it is broken. So thank you very much, and these other people in the back as well. If you can get together and do a better job, so much the better. But I do think our democracy is in crisis, and we need to do all we can to save it. Thank you.
Good point. Well, thank you all for being here. Now it's time for lunch. I failed to mention that if you're here for the first time, you're invited to have lunch with us, no cost. Otherwise, we have a $5, $7, and $10 contribution. And proceed.